Greetings. I hope you are all doing well in this world of hell. Um, this is a part two to a video I put out about a month or so ago called Define Fascism. That one was going over the 14 characteristics of fascism as defined by Dr. Lawrence Britt. But there were another 14 characteristics that are pretty similar that are defined by Umberto Eco. I think Umberto Eco's definitions are referred to more often than Lawrence Britt's, but I prefer Dr. Lawrence Britt's. So if you haven't checked out that video already, I'd go ahead and do that. Uh, Nevertheless, we're going to go over all 14 characteristics of Umberto Eco's definitions of fascism in this video because, just like I mentioned in the first video, a lot of people tend to confuse what fascism actually is. Is it communism but taken too far? So it's totalitarianism? Not quite. Fascism could become totalitarianism if taken too far. So with this list, I really hope to make clear, or at least try to help point out who it is in society that portrays these characteristics, who are pushing these characteristics of fascism, and who's actually endangering us, so to speak, society at large, into that descent towards fascism. So, we're going to go ahead and make myself smaller here. Go ahead and start going over this list. So, first off, Umberto Eco's 14 Signs of Fascism. The cult of tradition. Tradition for tradition's sake. If you have your population, your society, your civilization, your nation, so to speak, otherwise obsessed with the idea of tradition, then you are able to identify outsiders, people who don't partake in tradition, people who don't follow guidelines, or as reality would suggest, peer pressure from dead people. This has the potential to stifle progress if it interferes with the cult of tradition. Number two, the rejection of modernism. Little detail here. The rejection of the modern world was disguised as a rebuttal of the capitalistic way of life, but mainly concerned the rejection of the spirit of 1789 and of 1776, of course. 1789, obviously, when George Washington became the first president. The Enlightenment, the Age of Reason, is seen as the beginning of modern depravity. In this sense, ur-fascism, which is European fascism, I believe it's the way that Umberto Eco defines it, can be defined as irrationalism, meaning just sticking to tradition for the sake of tradition, like I just said. Sorry to stumble over my words. Is not exactly a rational way of progressing through society. Growing as a nation or as a species. Because obviously there are beliefs that are held by people who lived in the late 1700s and even the 1800s that we would not exactly look at too fondly today. So the rejection of modernism is pretty much essential for fascism. 3. The cult of action for action's sake. Detail here. Action being beautiful in itself, it must be taken before or without any previous reflection. Meaning you gotta act. You gotta do this thing. It's imperative. Thinking is a form of emasculation. The official fascist intellectuals were mainly engaged in attacking modern culture and the liberal intelligentsia for having betrayed traditional values. So it's literally saying, like, if you think for a second about what you're being told, about actions that you're being pressured to take, you're not exactly a man. You're not masculine. Thinking is for the feminine minded. It's for liberals, the liberal intelligentsia, as it is. Isn't that interesting? That's really, it says a lot, doesn't it? You know, this is only the third characteristic here, but this sounds very, very familiar. 4. Rejection of analytical criticism. Really? Oh, really? Oh, okay. Sorry, I'm getting too ahead of myself. The critical spirit makes distinctions, and to distinguish is a sign of modernism. Huh. In modern culture, the scientific community praises disagreement as a way to improve knowledge. For your fascism, disagreement is treason. You ever notice how a lot of conservatives in modern culture do not engage in any actual analytical criticism and don't allow any analytical criticism towards their beliefs, towards their policies, towards their ideas. Yet, at the same exact time, they are constantly griping about censorship. If there's so much censorship, then why is it that like all we see pushed down our throats every day are these conservative quote unquote thinkers, these conservative influencers? They have all the money behind them. They get all the ads. In your Twitter feed, you might even notice your whole homepage is full of far right pundits and whatnot, and Republicans, conservatives, whatnot, that are being followed by people that you follow. You're not seeing the people that you follow on your feed. It's just these conservatives. It's these right wingers. Why? Why is that? Of course, you can't exactly engage with them because they are in some way a protected class because they're verified, they're prioritized, yet they don't dare to engage in any actual public debate because if you actually listen to them form their arguments, they are horrendous at it. Just terrible. And for example, if you notice, to distinguish yourself from the fascist school of thought, the conservative school of thought, you're immediately turned against. You're immediately suspect. If you dare like question any rhetoric, any narrative that they put forth, then you're easily like just dismissed or labeled as a liberal or a communist or a groomer or whatever the fuck. Like if you just ask for like a shred of evidence, like, hey, is this actually happening? Then you're immediately just mocked and disregarded. That's how screwed up this school of thought has become. This cult-like mentality. Like any outside disagreement or questioning of any narrative put forth is met with disdain and dismissal. Or like if the right wing, if someone on the right, like they do constantly, misuses a word or lumps in an entire demographic or marginalized group with a heinous act or disturbing behavior or something like that. If that's even pushed back against in the slightest, you're a pedophile, you're a groomer, you're the worst thing imaginable. Because when it comes to this, any sort of analytical criticism, if it's actually adhered to, if it's actually accepted, like, okay, I'll correct myself, then fascism falls the fuck apart. And they know it. Because if you let one cornerstone go of fascist thought and these false narratives and this bigoted rhetoric, if any of that is relinquished in any way because it's not based in reality and they know it, then their brand falls apart. Their grift falls apart. The power of fascism relies on cult of tradition and rejecting any analytical criticism, because if any pitfalls and any of their weak arguments are bolstered, their ability to take power is completely shot. This is why exposure is important. This is why debate is important. But they don't like debate, and for good reason. Disagreement is treason. Next, rejection of diversity. Kind of like if you identify a certain way when it comes to your gender, or if you're even a leftist, or maybe you're woke. That innocuous, vapid term, you're woke, meaning you embrace and celebrate diversity. It is essential and imperative to fascism that all that gets rejected. Your fascism grows up and seeks for consensus by exploiting and exacerbating the natural fear of difference. That is conservatism 101 if I've ever heard it. Fear of difference. The first appeal of a fascist or prematurely fascist movement is an appeal against the intruders. Thus, fascism is racist by definition. It's really, really on the nose, isn't it? 6. Appeal to individual or social frustration. One of the most typical features of the historical fascism was the appeal to the frustrated middle class, a class suffering from an economic crisis or feelings of political humiliation or frightened by the pressure of lower social groups. In our time, when the old proletarians are becoming petty bourgeoisie, or bourgeois, I should say, and the lumpen are largely excluded from the political scene, the fascism of tomorrow will find its audience in this new majority. Populism. That's been pretty prominent the past 6-7 years. Because in order for fascism to thrive, fascists need to prey on the insecurities of the working class, the economic insecurities, the feeling of powerlessness, no upward mobility, and that's pretty essential because in democratic nations, you kind of need the permission of the populace, so to speak. So playing to those economic woes is pretty essential for fascism to thrive. And that's how they gain power, because power, in the end, is ultimately all that matters. Obsession with a plot. Ooh, this should be spicy. To people who feel deprived of a clear social identity, fascism says that their only privilege is the most common one, to be born in the same country. This is the origin of nationalism. The only ones who can provide an identity to the nation are its enemies. The followers must feel besieged. The easiest way to solve the plot is to appeal to xenophobia, but the plot must also come from the inside. And so this goes for, outside forces want to take over America. The left want to bring in all these immigrants and change the voting bloc, and this is where the conspiracy theory, the Great Replacement, comes into play. Or, colleges or liberal indoctrination centers. It's because none of these people, none of these fascists, none of these people on the right, none of these conservatives can actually debate their ideas. They can't actually win in the marketplace of ideas, any school of thought. So they have to make it out. Like all these people in college circles, intelligentsia, whatnot, they're the enemy, and they're weaponizing what have you. Insert xenophobia here. They have to weaponize immigrants or whatever. Of course, election denialism comes into play as well. It's the only way that they're able to gain power because they can't stand on their own ideas. 8. Self-humiliation. The followers must feel humiliated by the ostentatious wealth and force of their enemies. However, the followers must be convinced that they can overwhelm the enemies. Thus, by a continuous shifting of rhetorical focus, the enemies are at the same time too strong and too weak. This is so essential to fascist rhetoric. At the same time, these leftist forces, the woke mob, they're fragile. They're snowflakes. They can't handle differences of opinion, but at the same time, they are taking over the world. They're going to harm you and your family. You should arm yourselves against them because they might come for you next. It's such blatant doublespeak, such blatant Orwellian manipulation. Yet, for some reason, so many people fall for it. Or they notice it and they just don't care because they want power. 9. Life is lived for struggle. Pacifism is trafficking with the enemy. It is bad because life is permanent warfare. This, however, brings about an Armageddon complex. Since enemies have to be defeated, there must be a final battle, after which the movement will have control over the world. That's why it feels like things are just getting worse and worse and worse and worse. I can't not mention the recent shooting in Colorado Springs, because the immediate reaction from the fascist right was to downplay it or ignore it, or, oh look, the shooter might be the shooter is non-binary, as if that matters. They'll point to a million other things that they see as worse than the fact that the son of a meth addict who's a bigot, who also happens to be the grandson of a MAGA Republican who's a former congressman. They have to point at that as anything other than who they are. Fascist, Republican, anti-woke, anti-trans, what have you. Because their goal is violence. They just want you dead. The worse everything is, the more likely it is that conflict emerges. It is an obsession, an Armageddon complex, an obsession with the end. Because if there's this big war that ultimately comes about, then they can take control, or potentially seize power, because they can't do it. They can't do it through electoral means, and they can't do it by swaying people that, oh, hey, bigotry is actually really cool. So they have to keep on sowing and sowing and sowing seeds of hate and division and just vile bigotry, just so that they can have their way. And they profit off of it every step of the way. Number 10, popular elitism. Every citizen belongs to the best people of the world. The members of the party are the best among the citizens, but there cannot be patricians without plebeians. In fact, the leader knows that his force is based upon the weakness of the masses. Every subordinate leader despises his own underlings, and each of them despises his inferiors. That is absolutely true. The people that get voted in simply because they play into the fears of their voting base, they don't give a flying fuck about the needs of that base. They see them as scum, just like they do any other political opponent. They're nothing but a tool to levy themselves into power. They rely on the gullibility of this voter base, when in reality they are the elite. They may wage against the elite with all this anti-deep state rhetoric or whatnot, but in reality, they're part of the club. That's all there is to it. Number 11, encouragement of individual action / heroism. In every mythology, the hero is an exceptional being, but in fascist ideology, heroism is the norm. Yeah, this is an obsession by the right wing. It's all based on personality. Someone that they could buttress up. They can hoist high as a hero of this and that for insert meaningless, trivial, mundane act of bigotry or what have you, standing up against the woke mob. Just utterly meaningless gestures, just so they can bolster them for the movement, so to speak. Jordan Peterson would not be anywhere where he was if he actually was a respectable person and respectful. The right would not have latched onto him like a leech and bolstered his career. He would have ended up just being just some other guy in Canada. That's just one example. Number 12, disdain for women and condemnation of non-standard sexual habits. Matt Walsh has entered the chat. Yeah, this is an outright obsession by the right wing. They cannot stand the fact that some people have sex. Period. They can't stand the fact that people freely associate with one another sexually with consent. Non-standard sexual habits. Their obsession with traditionalism and, the nuclear family and whatnot is deeply rooted in traditional family roles. The woman is subservient to the man, should be a housemaker, and produce several children. That's it. They see that. They see women as nothing else but property, because if you're not property of the state, if you're not pumping out more children for the capitalist machine to keep grinding with a workforce, then they see that as utter societal decay. And there may be some truth to that, but ultimately, human beings are not property. Because keep in mind, clowns like Matt Walsh, they profit off of regurgitating this rhetoric. And if they're no longer getting that money, then what is the point in anything? You know? And there's a deep hypocrisy to it, too, and I'm just going to move on. 13. Selective populism via the concept of the people. The people is conceived as a quality, a monolithic entity expressing the common will. Since no large quantity of human beings can have a common will, the leader pretends to be their interpreter. You ever notice that? You ever notice how, like, and this is exactly what I was talking about with point number 12. A lot of right-wing commentators and conservative politicians pretend that they know exactly what the people want. They determine the will of the people by pretending it's their will. Having lost their power of delegation, citizens do not act. They are only called on to play the role of the people. Thus, the people is only a theatrical fiction. Wherever a politician casts doubt on the legitimacy of a parliament because it no longer represents the voice of the people, we can smell fascism. Yeah. Essentially, this comes down to, if government is not behaving in a way to my liking, where my power is stripped away, then it's illegitimate to me. We got this a lot during the 2020 election, obviously, because the election didn't go the way of the Republican Party. It was illegitimate. Last point, 14. Fascism speaks newspeak. We must be ready to identify other kinds of newspeak, even if they take an apparently innocent form. Yeah, like, can we please define what woke is and why it's bad? Yeah, this is happening quite a lot. The right will adopt terms from the left or the center or whatnot and weaponize it and use it against anything that steps out of the bounds that they determine. Yeah, this is a really useful list. Of course, if you notice, this all leans towards one ideology. Conservatism in America, in the West in particular, it's not prominent in left parties. If you even consider the Democratic Party left, which it's really not. It's the GOP. It's the Tory party. It's Viktor Orban in Hungary. It just seems like it's getting worse. And I don't really know what to add to any of this, other than just try to warn as many people as I can with the limited reach I have. I don't consider this fear-mongering because it's pretty prevalent. A lot of the right just wants you dead. Simply for existing. Simply for not identifying in a traditional manner, you know? If you represent change or opportunity, that's a threat. That's a threat to the system. So the system as it operates is on the verge of a fascist takeover. It's done its best to find balance for years and years and years, but it's slowly rotting away. The far right takeover of the Supreme Court, the hostility to democracy from the GOP, the hostility towards trans individuals, the obsession with people's genitals, as if that has anything to do with where your next meal is coming from, where your paycheck's going, how much of your wages are being taken in the form of profit that ends up going to stock buybacks and CEO bonuses instead of your pockets. But no, it's the woke mob. They're the threat. It's the people below you that you're told to kick down at. Not the people above you with all the power, all the money, all the policy influence on wages, taxes, labor. No, it's marginalized groups that don't have any power. The same marginalized groups that only ask to be respected for their identity, not harmed or threatened just for existing. Whether they're poor or not even from America. People just want to live in peace. But with fascism and the right wing in this country, and several countries, peace is not an option. when power is not total. The Republican Party is a death cult. The fascists will not stop until they have complete control. And even then, it won't be enough. That is the nature of fascism. If you could, please like this. If you haven't subscribed, please do so. Please share this. Share this everywhere. Check out the first part too if you haven't. Share that as well if you could. There's not much I can add to the discourse, but if it means warning more people about fascism and its nature, it's worth it. If it gets through to at least some people, then I'll know that I'm successful. Hope you all have a great Thanksgiving and a great Thanksgiving weekend. I'll see you guys soon.